It's time for another Bible-thumping wingnut Google Hangouting podcast with Matt Slick from carm.org. And now, here's your host, Andrew Rappaport.
Zeitgeist the movie. Is it fact or fiction? That is going to be tonight's discussion. For those who are going to be here to discuss it, we're going to have we're going to watch and discuss the first part of that movie, and then we'll open it up for discussion for anyone else that wants to join.
This podcast is a member of the Bible-thumping Wingnut Network.
All right, welcome everybody to another podcast episode with Semper Reformanda Radio.
Hi, welcome to Theology Gals.
Welcome everyone to the Logical Belief Ministries podcast.
Well, welcome to School of Biblical Hermeneutics.
Welcome everybody to Grappling with Theology.
What is going on, guys? Shine as lights coming at you.
Well, welcome to Slick Answers.
Good evening and welcome to Conversations from the Porch.
On Christ's solid rock I stand.
Hello and welcome to Living in the Vine.
This is the Council of Google Plus.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Bible-thumping Wingnut podcast.
The Bible-thumping Wingnut Network. 12 podcasts, one network. Check them out at BibleThumpingWingnut.com.
Alrighty, and so as we were saying, we are going to be discussing a movie that I recently have seen, and if anyone has been on the streets evangelizing kind of in any form, you have had to deal with the arguments that get made of Zeitgeist the movie. This has been a how can we say, a popular, I can't even say really movie. It wasn't, it was something that really is on YouTube. There's about 3 million views on this. And really the argument is that many have is that Christianity is really not something that's based in history. Jesus Christ never actually existed. And that this is just something that we have in the stars. We're actually going to go through the movie and chop it up. Have with me some of the guys from the Council of Google Plus, Vincent and John, if you guys want to introduce yourselves real quick.
Hey, I'm Vincent, FEMA Region 4. Welcome.
You guys are going to have to explain the FEMA region for those who are new to, who watch Slick Answers and are new to the council.
And I'm John Wilkinson. I'm broadcasting from FEMA Region 10, Washington State. Basically, the whole background with that is it's actually kind of an homage, I guess, to one of my favorite podcasts. And my favorite podcast is actually one of my favorite podcasts is the No Agenda Show. Warning: it is not a Christian podcast, so I will give you warning on that. But it is a news analysis podcast where two guys, Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak, get together for about twice a week, and they basically break down all the news that are happening throughout the week. And it's a great podcast, and they also just kind of poke a lot of fun and comedy into the whole thing. And so they actually kind of poke fun at the whole FEMA region thing, where the governmental maps broke down all our states into sections called FEMA regions. And it's kind of strange how they created all these FEMA camps. And so we just kind of put a wink and a nod to it, and just kind of poke fun with it. So you can take it however you want.
Well, for those who are familiar with Matt Slick, they know that Matt has a view with the FEMA regions that we won't get into. But so let's talk about the movie Zeitgeist. This is based off of a book called The Christ Conspiracy, the greatest story ever sold. I can't pronounce the author's name. His last name is Murdoch. Can't pronounce his first name. Asayaki or something. I'll butcher it, so I will just go with Murdoch. So here's the thing.
The author's real name, or is it a pseudonym?
I think it may be a pseudonym. I know that the movie is a pseudonym. The movie is I'm drawing a complete blank on the author, on the supposed author of the movie. Hold on. I'm trying to look it up. I should have had that one memorized, but Peter Joseph. So this was Peter Joseph is a pseudonym in 2007 when he when he came out with this. So basically, this is something where you end up seeing that the movie itself is you don't have his real name. I do believe Murdoch is maybe at least the name. It's the name I think the book goes by. But here's the thing that we see. This is the author of the book and the movie have no credentials in either theology or, for that matter, in studying of Egyptology. If you watch the movie, you're going to see three main parts. We're going to focus on the first part. The first part is where he's going to try to argue that religion, and he only focuses on Christianity by way. Guys, let me ask you, do you notice that? Everyone wants to bash religion. They'll either do one of two things. They try to make it look like all religions are bad by trying to undercut somehow Christianity, or say all religions are bad by pointing out that what like Islam does and say, well, all religions do it, therefore Christianity is bad. Have you guys noticed that trend?
Yeah, there's definitely a common target in all of them, for sure. You don't see many dedicated movies just to debunking Horus. So,
isn't that a fallacy of equivocation?
Exactly. And so for folks that don't know that fallacy, the fallacy of equivocation is where you take two things that may have nothing to do with each other, but they have the same term, in this case, religion, and you argue that if one uses planes to fly into buildings, therefore all religions would do that, or some other religion would do that if one group does it in the name of one religion. That would be equivocating on the term religion. It's using it two different ways. And so they're trying to equivocate two different religions and say they would obviously do the same things. So here's the thing. We look at this, and I want to actually go through this movie with you guys and get some input. And we're going to see, I want to fact check this. There's been a bunch of folks out here. I had seen this on the internet for so long, having to deal with arguments of Horace when I'm sitting there in open air preaching. And I just decided, I'm going to go watch this movie. And I went and watched it. And I don't know, I kind of giggled and said, really? People take this serious? Then I started realizing, well, not all of the professing atheists take this serious. There's actually many that would argue against it. One atheist site that I saw said, you don't combat a lie with a lie, which was kind of funny. I wasn't sure which one they were thinking was the lie. The one that we're going to see, where they say everything that we're going to see is whether it's fact or fiction. But I guess their starting point is Christianity is a lie. And we're going to see that throughout this movie. So the argument, though, that we're going to see is that this is religion, or Christianity, is a copycat of older religions. And so we're going to get into a couple things later on that we'll address with some fallacies. But what I would like to start with is to ask you guys, when was the first time that we see a mention historically of the gospel and the idea of God doing something to save humanity? When's the first time we know of that in recorded history?
You mean like manuscript evidence, or?
Well, do we have something somewhere after creation that we have recorded the first, the proto-evangelica, the first mention of a gospel?
You mean in Genesis, where
Genesis 3,
the serpent and the
Eve.
Oh man, I'm trying to think of the verse.
Hello. Yeah, it's your seed.
3:15 or something.
Yeah, her seed will be crushed. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's it. It's Genesis 3:15, where it is mentioned. So this is shortly after sin enters into humanity. So the fact is that we have to start with the fact that if there's things that we see that are similar in false religions, what we end up having to really recognize is the fact that demons knew what was going to be happening from the beginning, from early on. And so we can't exclude the fact that they are going to try to counterfeit the truth. But you know what? That isn't even needed. for an argument like this. Let's play some clips of this movie and see. And what I want you guys to do is just stop me when we need to, and I'll stop at different parts. But when you guys see something that needs to be addressed, where you want to comment, we're just going to stop it. Just say stop, and we'll start discussing. So here it is.
Gotcha.
This is the sun. As far back as 10,000 BC, history is abundant with carvings and writings reflecting people's respect and adoration for this object. And it is simple to understand why, as every morning the sun will rise, bringing vision, warmth, and security, saving man from the cold, blind, predator-filled darkness of night. Without it, the cultures understood, the crops would not grow, and life on the planet would not survive. These realities made the sun the most adorned object of all time. Likewise, they were also very good at the stars. The tracking of the...
Okay. Oh, we're getting some feedback there from Vincent. So, Vincent, were you looking to get us to stop there, or were you just getting feedback? We got two Vincents.
Oh yeah, trying to get on my phone.
Okay, so right off the bat, I do want to notice there's going to be an important thing. Notice how the word sun is going to be used. Now, when we speak of the sun, right? This is in English. And we speak of Jesus the Son. How's that spelled? I mean, this should be a simple question for folks, but John, how do we spell sun?
That would be S-O-N.
And let's see what kind of sun they refer to when they're going to be referring to the sun, because I think, I could be wrong, but I think they're going to refer to it as a different spelling, like S-U-N.
The stars allowed them to recognize and anticipate events which occurred over long periods of time, such as eclipses and full moons. They in turn cataloged celestial groups into what we know today as constellations. This is the cross of the zodiac, one of the oldest conceptual images in human history. It reflects the sun as it figuratively passes through the 12 major constellations over the course of a year. It also reflects the 12 months of the year, the 4 seasons, and the solstices and equinoxes. The term zodiac relates to the fact that constellations were anthropomorphized or personified as figures or animals. In other words, the early civilizations did not just follow the sun and stars, they personified them with elaborate myths involving their movements and relationships. The sun, with its life-giving and saving qualities, was personified as a representative of the unseen creator or God, God's son, the light of the world, the savior of humankind.
Okay, so they have it as God's, what's the spelling on that? Huh.
That would be
God's S-U-N. Now, how are they using it, though, to argue? As S-O-N.
S-O-N, yeah, they're going to.
So this is the, I mean, and I'm just spelling it out for those who may be listening on the podcast and not watch this. But there you see, and you're going to see this sort of deception throughout. Just little subtle things that if you apply just a little bit of critical thinking, just a little, you realize that this movie should not be taken serious by anybody. I think it is taken serious because so many people want it to be true. So right off the bat, we see that they're oh, and I should mention, I'm playing this so we could get through it a little quicker. I was playing it at at 1.5, but I was just asked to turn it down a little bit for some folks, so we'll turn
1.25. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't hear very fast, so.
Yeah, we'll turn that down. But the point is that what I want you to see is right off the bat they're gonna start to make the argument that these personifications of the stars, there happens to be 12, and the center happens to be a sun. Now, what we notice is a misspelling or a purposeful one. You think this works in any other language, or is this just English? Where we get sun and sun.
Yep.
Right. So.
And they do that. They do that too later. Maybe not this one, but where they will confuse because one of the signs in the stars makes an M, so that obviously means Mary. Well, you're reading a lot into it.
Correct. And you know what we're going to see. Well, let me play it because we're going to see more of their deception. And by the way, I should mention this. You know, you can see it up here. It's a 2007 movie, so I'm sure they've realized the rejections, and they still, you know, this is the thing. They don't give up the conclusion. They just try to, you know, see how they can make it sound a little bit more plausible. Why is a movie like this believable? Simply because of something called confirmation bias, where you start with a conclusion and you only accept information that supports the conclusion. So what they end up doing is looking for things of similarity that they can say, see, this proves the point. So why is it that so many will follow a thinking like this? It's called motivational reasoning. Motivational reasoning is where you allow your emotions to affect the way you'll think about something, and therefore it affects the way you're going to think about something. So that in a case like this, you wish it to be true, you want it to be true, so you're going to believe that it's true. That is one of the things in philosophy or logic that you have to be aware of. I think many of those that profess to be atheists don't recognize that they think only Christians can be affected by confirmation bias and motivational reasoning. They forget they can too. But this next section is going to get real interesting in some deception that we're going to have to explain to those who are watching. So I slowed it down a little bit for you.
Likewise, the 12 constellations represented places of travel for God's Son, and were identified by names, usually representing elements of nature that happened during that period of time. For example, Aquarius, the water bearer, who brings the spring rains. This is Horus. He is the sun god of Egypt of around 3000 BC. He is the sun anthropomorphized, and his life is a series of allegorical myths involving the sun's movement in the sky. From the ancient hieroglyphics in Egypt, we know much about this solar messiah. For instance, Horus, being the sun or the light, had an enemy known as Set, and Set was the personification of the darkness or night. And metaphorically speaking, every morning Horus would win the battle against Set, while in the evening Set would conquer Horus and send him into the underworld. It is important.
Okay, so right there, they're trying to make a depiction between really God and Satan.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, good and evil. Right.
It's not even close though. Yeah. Biblical Christianity
so,
doesn't have God and Satan on the same level playing field. It's the complete misrepresentation of Christianity.
That's right. And so what you end up seeing is here they're going to try to make an argument that, you see, you have good, you have evil. Well, gee, yeah, we do have that. I mean, because we have a conscience, we know good and evil. So the fact that there's good and evil in places should not surprise folks. All right. So let's continue.
To note that dark versus light, or good versus evil, is one of the most ubiquitous mythological dualities ever known, and is still expressed on many levels to this day. Broadly speaking, the story of Horus is as follows. Horus was born on December 25th of the Virgin Isis Mary. His birth was accompanied by a star in the east, which, in turn, 3 kings followed to locate and adorn the newborn savior. At the age of 12, he was a prodigal child teacher. At the age of 30, he was baptized by a figure known as Anup, and thus began his ministry. Horus had 12 disciples he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick and walking on water.
Okay, I want to back up just a second to get that list. So let's look at this list that. Let's see if we can get that. But if we look at the list that they gave, of course, and I should have mentioned it at the beginning of this that because some folks are asking in the chat, gee, where's Slick Answers? Well, Matt Slick is off today, and so we decided we'd take a look at this movie that so many have discussed. So I want to go through this.
Horus had 12 disciples.
Okay, so first off, Horus born on December 25th. Well, historically, we don't know if that's actually true. We don't have a date for his birth. We're going to get to the importance of December 25th in a bit later. Born of a virgin. Well, if he was born of a virgin, one of the things that we end up seeing is that Horus, well, supposedly he's the mother of Isis. What you're showing, okay, let's get John's screen up there. John has.
Sorry about that. Hit the wrong button.
Okay. I thought you were, you had that, what I was looking to bring up anywhere or discuss, but
go ahead.
So what we end up seeing is that born of a virgin, I don't want to get too graphic, but let's take a look at how Horus was born. Horus's mother, Isis, supposedly, right? That's the way it's explained. And Isis, well, she was not a virgin. She was married to,
Osiris.
Osiris, and I'm trying to figure out how I can explain it. So Osiris was basically chopped up into many pieces. His man part was the only part that was not found and put back together. So she created or fashioned a golden man part, and then using that, she had relations with Osiris, and Horus is the result. That is not a virgin birth. Okay, that's not what we would say is a virgin birth. A star in the east. I couldn't find any reference in Egyptology referring to Horus's with regarding a star from the east, adorned by three kings. Don't know about that, but we're going to see in a bit. You know, this is one of the fallacies that they have. Jesus Christ was not adorned by three kings, but many magi. So this is where, even if Horus was ordained by three kings, what you see is the fact that Jesus was not. Jesus was ordained by king makers. That's what the magi would have been. They would not have been king. All we know is that there were three gifts that they gave. There was probably, anyone that does any research in that assumes that there was probably way more than three of them. There's just three gifts.
Three gifts, yeah.
But they weren't.
I was going to say that too. Also, that I guess they're getting confused or falsely equivocating again with the Christmas song of "We Three Kings," and so they just assume, I guess, that they were kings instead of just magi.
Correct. The idea of the king makers comes from really in the Babylonian area, where the magi from the Babylonians would have been the ones to install a new king, which would explain why someone that called himself the king of Israel, like, you know, Pilate, wow, just drew a blank, not Pilate.
Caesar? Or
no, in Israel. Anyway, he called himself the king of Israel. Hate this getting older stuff. You forget a little, but basically Herod,
yeah.
Herod would have been upset. Herod would have worried, because here you have these guys who come into Herod asking where the king is born. And so what you end up with is you end up seeing how nowhere in the Bible doesn't mention there were three, and nowhere does it mention they're kings, they're king makers. Now I am having to laugh because I'm seeing in the chat people are asking me to cite the sources. I would challenge anyone to watch this movie and see where any source is cited, period.
Thank you. I was going to point that out earlier. I was like, where are their sources? I'd love to know that.
The fact is that, so where's my source? It's called the Bible.
Yeah, I was going to say, what? Bible?
Yeah, look at the Bible's account and you tell me where Jesus Christ was adorned by three kings. You're not going to find it, because it never happened. He was a teacher at the age of 12. Well, the reality is that I don't know whether Horace was claimed to be a teacher at 12, but what we do know is that Jesus would have been baptized, or sorry, bar mitzvahed. Sorry, I used the wrong word. Bar mitzvahed at 12, because that was the common age. And yes, every Jewish boy would have been teaching at the age of 12. I taught at the age of 12 behind a pulpit. That's not unusual. In fact, every Jewish boy would have done that. So I guess every Jewish boy is equivalent to Horus. Baptized in ministry at the age of 30. Now, this one I have to laugh at, because baptism didn't exist outside of Judaism.
Yeah. Well, that takes into effect that they did a lot in this video is they take Christian terms and apply it to anything remotely similar on these other. Well, they threw him in a river. Well, let's call that baptism. So they do that a lot. They import Christian terms into these other mythologies to make them, force them to line up in any way they could.
Correct.
I was going to say also, as far as like resources go, I mean, I just did some basic Googling. That's all I did, just to kind of see, to read up on just Horus himself. And these are the notes that I took, or just clipped and saved. But I mean, a lot of it was from Wikipedia, which I know it's not exactly the number one source they use, but it's definitely, you get a definitely good idea. There's another website I came across called Egyptian myths.net. There's info please. I mean, I got a whole bunch of stuff from various sites. Ancient.eu. It definitely gives you a lot of information as far as their background and mythology. I got a lot of stuff here from that particular website, ancient.eu, and it's just a lot of good stuff. And so, I mean, this is basic stuff you can do, folks, and it's not rocket science. And all you have to do is just do some Googling and not trust, whatever you see here on YouTube from this one particular individual.
Are you saying that we can't trust someone that put a video out that's seen by 3 million? I mean, could 3 million people have watched it and be wrong?
Yeah.
So now let's take a look at this last one. 12 disciples. Now Jesus had 12 disciples, correct? And yet, as we just saw earlier in this movie, they argue that the 12 disciples that Horace had was really 12 constellations in the stars. Now, they're arguing that the personification. Now, when we look at the disciples of Christ, those are actual people, not stars that have the names of people. So again, an equivocation of the, again, equivocating on, the terms here of disciples and people. So let's continue and see the rest of their arguments, how well they stand up.
He traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick and walking on water. Horace was known by many gestural names such as the Truth, the Light, God's Anointed Son, the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, and many others. After being betrayed by typhus...
Okay, so if someone was to do a search for Horace, I mean, there is, I'm going to show a video later that someone's going to go through all of these lists and show that the performing of miracles is actually the only one that they both have. But you take a look at these, the supposed titles, and you're going to see that those titles don't exist for both Horace and Jesus. Now, it's interesting, if you notice the two that he puts up here, the Lamb of God, which Jesus was known by, but you don't see Horace ever known by. The Light, which you see Horace known by, but not Jesus. Jesus is not called the Light. He's called, the Way, the Lamb, a door, but he's not called the Light in that way. So, let's see what else they have.
Was crucified.
Okay, he's crucified.
Wrong. Nowhere does it say that.
No, he was I think stabbed with wood. That's not the same thing. Actually, with the life of Horace, it's hard to know. Did he die by a scorpion? What did he? There's actually 3 or 4 different ways of his death, and one of the things is that in the Egyptian mythology, they do have Horace and his father intermixed, and therefore it's kind of hard to know which one's which. So there's some ways where they refer to the death and you don't know which one he's referring to. So now, crucifixion, the way that we speak of it, didn't exist in 300 BC. It was something the Persians came up with in about 1000 BC. So here you have the initial problem. You end up seeing that you have them coming up, and John, you mentioned this earlier, coming up with Christian terminology and then trying to read it back in to history to say, see, it's the same thing. And, dying by wood doesn't mean crucifixion.
So we're 8 minutes and 33 seconds into this. And how many false equivocations have we seen?
More than we can count so far.
More, yeah. I've lost count. I literally have. It's ridiculous how bad this is. And we haven't even begun hearing the argument. This is just a presentation.
Yeah. So let's keep going through this. And I know some others are going to want to weigh in. We're going to be opening this up later for folks. So if you're taking notes, please, take your notes so we can, we want to engage, but I do want to get through this entire thing. I don't want people to say we took it out of context. I did cut out the first couple of minutes only because of foul language, where they tried to use the proof of a comedian as evidence of a good, using a comedian is always a good source for, scholarly work, I'm sure. But let's continue with Horace here.
Buried for 3 days and thus resurrected.
Okay, so Horace was never claimed to have been resurrected. So, and that's one of the things that, we'll play a clip later on of someone that goes through and shows, every one of these arguments that are made, you have someone that's supposedly dead and resurrected in 3 days. They either are dead and stay dead, or they never died. When you actually look at the accounts, and we'll end up seeing someone that makes the statement that Egyptologists argue that no one, that there's no case of anyone being dead and resurrected except for Christ.
These attributes of Horus, whether original or not, seem to permeate in many cultures of the world, for many other gods are found to have the same general mythological structure. Attis, one of the virgin.
let's get the ball rolling here with all the false equivocations. Go ahead.
Yeah. So now we get to Attis. So now notice, though, this is the idea of a copycat. This is the idea that if you have one in one religion, you have it in another, it must be fake. So let me real quick at this point, I'll point out, if this is true, think about this reasoning. Horus existed, and therefore, because Horus existed, the argument's going to be Jesus couldn't have existed because Atlas existed, and there's these similarities. The argument is Atlas didn't exist, Horus didn't exist, therefore Jesus couldn't have existed. Okay, so that being the argument, let me just bring up Wikipedia, because you can never go wrong with Wikipedia. And I'm bringing it up so that you can see, so you can do your own search. And the links for this are in the description. But the Wreck of the Titan. This is a book, a novel, a fictional novel that came out 14 years before the sinking of the Titanic. And yet, what do you see? Look at the similarities here between the Titanic and the Titan. You have the Titan, which was 800 feet long, the Titanic 82 feet long. The displacement on the original of the writing of the book was 45,000 tons. The real displacement of the Titanic, 46,000 tons. Both described as unsinkable. Both had triple screw propellers. Both had a shortage of lifeboats. Both were struck by an iceberg, and both sank. Would anyone try to argue that the Titanic didn't exist because the Titan never existed? I sure hope that you would say the answer to that's no. But that is the argument that they're making. By their own argument, if they want to stay consistent with this, then they have to admit the Titanic never existed. That it's a myth, because the Titan, which came 14 years earlier, was a myth. The unsinkable ship, well, that was described 14 years before the Titanic. And so right off the bat, this is a fallacy. And what you end up seeing is that when you have to resort to this kind of deception, now I understand that most professing atheists look at this, and even seeing some comments that are coming through, people realize this is not legitimate scholarship. And to those who believe that, I commend you and say good, because we agree. But the fact is that when people resort to this and then want to believe stuff like this, it shows that you end up having people who are deceived, which is the irony, because at the end of this section of this movie, they're going to say that religion can't free us because religion enslaves us. But someone that looks at this movie and can't see the fallacies is enslaved by their own religion, atheism. Let's continue with Atlas now.
December 25th, crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected. Krishna of India, born of the Virgin Devaki with a star.
Okay, so we ended up having, let's back that up just a bit to see. We ended up having Atlas. He was born of a virgin. Again, born on December 25th. Notice the importance of that date. Again, crucified. He was crucified before crucifixion existed. That's very strange. Was he born of a virgin? Well, no, he was. The way that his mother was impregnated, his father, one of the gods, not to get too graphic, had his seed fall onto a tree. An almond fell onto his mother, and she was impregnated that way. That's not exactly the virgin birth that we discuss. When we look at crucifixion, again, how could he be crucified before crucifixion existed? He wasn't crucified. There's some accounts that say he was driven insane by a lover, and then he died in the arms of a nymph. That's not crucifixion. Some say that he castrated himself and bled to death. These are the accounts. The other account was that he was killed by a boar. None of those are even remotely similar to crucifixion, the way Jesus was. And so what you end up looking at is here you have just making the claims, and historically it can't be supported. And we're going to see a video that I want to show later that'll debunk all this in just 4 minutes. But let's look at some others.
Was resurrected. Krishna of India, born of the Virgin Bhavaki with a star in the east signaling his coming. He performed miracles with his disciples, and upon his death was resurrected.
Okay, so the resurrection mentioned with Krishna is not the same resurrection. That's reincarnation. Very different.
Wow.
Not the same.
It's false equivocation to the extreme right there.
Yes. And, but this shows, I mean, the level that they have to go through in debunking supposedly or making this argument to debunk Jesus just shows a level of dishonesty that either they didn't do their homework, okay, one, or more likely they just wish this was true. And so they ignore anything else. All right.
Dionysus of Greece, born of a virgin on December 25th, was a traveling teacher who performed miracles such as turning water into wine. He was referred to as the King of Kings, God's only begotten Son, the Alpha and Omega, and many others. And upon his death, he was resurrected.
Okay, so born of a virgin, born again. I do want to just point out, born on December 25th. That becomes an important one again because we're going to see in a bit the importance of December 25th. But we're going to have to ask the question that notice they all are arguing born on December 25th. That's nice. We're going to show that no reputable historian or biblical scholar makes the argument that Jesus was born on December 25th. And that's going to be the irony of this.
I was going to also point out, can you imagine being Mary in her shoes right there at that moment when she was told that she's going to have a baby? What did she probably do? Roll her eyes at the angel and say, oh, yes, the old story of me being, giving birth as a virgin, or, it's like, I don't think she didn't react that way. She was actually quite surprised that she was going to give birth, even though she had not been with another man. So, I mean, correct. It's just hilarious that they claim that, everybody was born of a virgin, but yet, Mary didn't express her, her thoughts as if it not being original,
Well, how was Dionysus born? Well, the story goes that he was the son of Zeus and had a mortal mother. Zeus came and had relations with her. That's not born of a virgin. So again, you see that right there when they're trying to force this. But it's going to be interesting when we get to December 25th in a bit.
Mithra of Persia, born of a virgin on December 25th. He had 12 disciples and performed miracles, and upon his death was buried for 3 days and thus resurrected. He was also referred to as the Truth, the Light, and many others. Interestingly, the sacred day of worship of Mithra was Sunday.
Okay, so now the interesting thing is that the sacred day of worship for Jesus was not Sunday, it was Saturday. It was only after his death that the church started celebrating his resurrection on Sunday. So again, you end up seeing born on the 25th, all of them. The proof is born on the 25th, born of a virgin. Again, Mithra, there's no evidence, born of a virgin. But we end up seeing the dead and resurrected again. Now, here's the interesting thing with each one of these. We've said it before, but when you actually look in the accounts and you go and you do some searching, you're going to see that this is not the same death and resurrection that we end up talking about when we discuss death, burial, resurrection. They end up arguing for a something that they try to say is a death, burial, resurrection, as we've been seeing. So what you end up seeing here is just an argument that they're desperate to try to prove. They start with a conclusion and are desperate to prove it. Now, with each one of them, do you notice born on December 25th? I'm pointing that out because that becomes really important to this. We're going to get to that in a minute.
The fact of the matter is there are numerous saviors from different periods from all over the world which subscribe to these general characteristics.
Okay, so there you go. Do you notice how he just lists a whole bunch of things?
There's his references.
Yeah. Okay. So and someone's arguing in the chat, the references are at the end. Yes. And the person that said the references are at the end also admitted, and they've mostly been debunked. That's the irony, is that the fact is they just listed off. Now, this is almost an appeal to authority. It's appeal to say, look, we have all of these. It's the argument that there's these others out there and they must have the same similar common traits. But what you end up seeing is that the traits that we've seen are not common, and they don't share them with Christ.
What they're making is called the generalization of fallacy, where all these religions obviously are generally the same. They have the same features.
Correct. That'd be the better. Yeah.
Question remains, why these attributes? Why the virgin birth on December 25th? Why dead for 3 days and the inevitable resurrection? Why 12 disciples or followers? To find out, let's examine the most recent of the solar messiahs. Jesus Christ was born of the Virgin Mary on December 25th in Bethlehem. His birth was announced by a star in the east, which 3 kings or magi.
Wrong. Wrong.
Okay. Was he born December 25th?
No.
Well, let's go to the History Channel. Can you go wrong with the History Channel? We got to trust them. Let's look at a quick video from the History Channel.
Decorating trees, exchanging gifts, and singing songs about Santa Claus. It's what most people think of when they think of Christmas. But for Christians, December 25th has a more important significance. The holiday honors the birth of Jesus Christ some 2,000 years ago. But we bet you didn't know that in the early years of Christianity, Christians didn't celebrate Christmas at all. In fact, there is no mention of December 25th in the Bible. Early Christians couldn't even agree on which date Jesus was actually born. It was only in the 3rd century that December 25th became the official celebration of the birth of Jesus, most likely because it coincided with already existing pagan festivals. By the end of the 8th century, Christmas was widely celebrated across Europe, but its pagan roots died hard, and for many centuries people marked the holiday with wild parties, similar to Mardi Gras celebrations. This would lead some religious purists, such as the Puritan settlers of colonial America, to oppose Christmas celebrations. In 1644, the Massachusetts legislature fined anyone who observed Christmas 5 shillings, which was a lot of money at the time. In fact, Christmas as we know it didn't really begin until the 1800s. That's when Germany's Prince Albert brought his country's longtime tradition of decorating evergreen trees to England after his marriage to Queen Victoria. When an image of the royal family next to their 40-foot Christmas tree was published in American magazines in 1848, the custom caught on in the United States as well. The tradition of sending Christmas cards also started in England around the same time. Giving gifts is a relatively old Christmas tradition, with roots going back many centuries. At first, gift-giving had religious significance, to remind people of the gifts brought to baby Jesus by the 3 kings. But the Industrial Revolution and the rise of advertising in the 19th and 20th centuries made Christmas the commercial holiday it is today, even as it continues to have religious meaning for Christians. What about the most famous of all Christmas characters, Santa Claus? He's actually based on St. Nicholas of Myra, a Dutch...
Okay, so we'll stop with that from there and get back to, But the point being
Saint
is,
Nick is awesome, man. He's the one that punched Athanasius. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but so notice all of the argument is December 25th, and yet we don't have. I mean, 1800s is when the 25th really became popular. You know, this was never something that was held to. It was first seen as when Constantine Christianized. It says we're all a Christian empire, and they have a holiday on December 25th that they celebrate, and they need to give it a Christianized reason to celebrate. So they just say, okay, we're going to celebrate the birth of Christ. This is the irony. This guy's whole argument is December 25th, and he's going to make a stronger argument in just a little bit. And yet, when you watch what's going to come up, know that Christ wasn't born on December 25th. And therefore, everything this guy argues for December 25th is debunked. It's complete bunk. Three kings. We already said there's no mention of three kings in the Bible. There's three gifts from Magi, the wise men, that as far as we could tell would have been, king makers, but they weren't kings. So even as he tries to describe Jesus, he can't get any facts right.
And adorn a new savior. He was a child teacher at 12. At the age of 30, he was baptized by John.
Okay, was he a child teacher at 12? Well, yes. Every Jewish child was a teacher at 12. And he wasn't a child teacher. 12 years old to 12 or 13, that changed between 12 and 13 years old is when in Judaism you become a man. Yeah. The showing of that you've entered into manhood is that you stand in the synagogue and you teach from God's word, bar mitzvah, son of the law, son of Torah. So you become a son of reading and teaching of the law. So you end up being a son of the mitzvah. Okay, this is what every Jewish child does. There's nothing miraculous about that. There's nothing super special about that. That's something that every Jewish child would do. So that argument doesn't really hold because this is something that every Jewish child would have done. Every Jewish male, I should say.
John the Baptist, and thus began his ministry. Jesus had 12 disciples, which he traveled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick, walking on water, raising the dead. He was also known as the King of Kings, the Son of...
Okay, did he have 12 disciples? Well, actually, no, he had more than that. We know of 12 of them, but there were actually groups of them. There was 3 groups within that 12, where there was 3 to 4 that were closest: Peter, James, and John, and you'd also see Andrew sometimes. But the 3 were with Jesus at times where the others weren't. And you end up seeing that there's 3 groups when you look at the groupings. But you'll also see there were women that came along. They weren't mentioned. There were more than 12 that would be following along. We have the 12 that are mentioned because of their male and they're close to Christ.
God, the light of the world, the Alpha and Omega, the Lamb of God, and many, many others.
Okay, so when we look at this list, Son of God, they use in a different way. This is an equivocation. Son of God in Judaism would be a reference to deity, to a reference to God. How do we know that? When that term is used of Jesus Christ, the Jews want to kill him for claiming to be God. It is a term to say you are the essence of God. That's the reason Jesus called himself the Son of Man. Lamb of God, in the sense that you are a sacrifice for God. And yet none of these others do you see in any of these other deities that they're trying to argue, Mithra or Horace or any of the others, do they claim to be a sacrifice for people? So you end up seeing here, light of the world. I don't know. Do you guys remember where Jesus is called the light of the world?
No, actually, I do remember him saying that we are the light of the world.
I think there's a song, a children's song. Maybe that's where the guy got it from. Maybe this guy who did this movie, the reason he didn't want to use his real name is because people would realize he grew up in the church and he was using a kid's song for his argument. Don't know.
After being betrayed by his disciple Judas and sold for 30 pieces of silver, he was crucified, placed in a tomb, and after 3 days was resurrected and ascended into heaven. First of
Okay, so Jesus, born of a virgin. We notice that his virgin birth is different than all the others that were mentioned. Born on December 25th. No, that's not correct. The star in the east. Oh, wait, we're going to hold off on that one because he's going to explain what he thinks the star of the east is, and that's going to get funny. 12 disciples. Well, he had more than 12 disciples. Perform miracles. Well, there we can agree. Died for 3 days and resurrected. Again, the difference here is that he died and resurrected in the same way he was alive before, which is unlike any of the others.
Notice how it doesn't say anything about crucifixion.
The birth sequence is completely astrological.
Okay, so here we're going to get into where he's going to get astrological and try to argue that this is really something that you see in the stars. Now mind you, we're only 11 minutes into the 30 minutes that we're going to focus in on. If you do look at the rest, if you think that this guy's whacked, if you think the guy's not whacked now, watch the rest of the movie where he says that 9/11 was really an inside job, because that's what he focuses section 2 on. And section 3 is that there's really a bunch of bankers that sit behind closed doors that rule the entire world. So clearly this guy is a conspiracy nut. This is done in 2007. If he redid this movie today, he'd probably be arguing for a flat earth.
The east is Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, which on December 24th aligns with the 3 brightest stars in Orion's belt. These 3 bright stars in Orion's belt are called today what they were called in ancient times, the 3 kings. And the 3 kings and the brightest star, Sirius, all point to the place of the sunrise on December 25th. This is why...
Okay, notice this.
The 3 kings follow
the
star in the east.
Okay, so notice this. The 3 kings follow Cyrus, and the birth of God's son, S-U-N, at the winter solstice on December 25th. This is the irony. First off, from what I did ask someone that I know who is an astrologist, and basically he said, if you look in the night star on any day of any year, those stars, what's called the 3 kings and Cyrus, line up that way every day. But that aside, if you look at this guy's argument, the guy's argument is that this is only on December 25th. And so the whole idea is that this is really astronomical because this is born on the winter solstice of December 25th, but Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. You see, right there undercuts this guy's whole argument, because everything he's going to say now with this whole argument of these stars pointing to the sun, which when he says God's son, he's using it, he's equivocating only in English because he's using it as S-O-N. That's meaning Jesus, because remember, he's saying this is pointing to Jesus, and yet he's using that, as you can, if you can see the video, the birth of God's son, S-U-N, at winter solstice. So you end up seeing the equivocation of the words that only works in English. You see the equivocation that he's assuming that that the stars only line up on this one day focus this way, and yet Jesus wasn't born on that day.
In order to locate the sunrise, the birth of the sun.
Now, notice how he said right there, the birth of the sun, and he's referring to Jesus when he's using it as the birth of the sun, S-U-N, for the winter solstice. This only works, again, I'm saying this only works in English, but this is a desperate attempt to prove something that you can't prove honestly. And if you argue that Zeitgeist got truth to it, then you really have to realize, if you're going to be honest, you have to realize that this argumentation is faulty. And this is not a way to argue. You don't argue by using terms that sound similar to one another. Again, notice in here, he's got the 3 kings.
Virgo the Virgin. Virgo in Latin means virgin. The ancient glyph for Virgo is the altered M. This is
okay, this becomes funny. Virgin. So now this is where you get the equivocation, is virgin is the Virgo, and it looks like the letter M, which stands for,
along with other virgin mothers such as Adonis's mother Myra or Buddha's mother Maya, begin with an M. Virgo is also referred to
so Virgo must refer to Mary.
Holding a sheaf of wheat. This house of bread and its symbol of wheat represents August and September, the time of harvest. In turn, Bethlehem, in fact, literally translates to house of bread. Bethlehem is thus a reference to the constellation Virgo, a place in the sky, not on earth.
Okay, so Bethlehem must refer to a place in the sky, not an actual city that we have in existence even today. Now, here's the problem. When we see the reference to Bethlehem in the scripture, it's not referenced as just Bethlehem, but Bethlehem, the city of David. Now, unless David was born in the sky, then Bethlehem can't be referring to the same thing that this guy is saying it refers to, because David was born in a town called Bethlehem. And the references in the Bible to Bethlehem referring to the birth of Christ refer to it as the city of David. So they make it really clear that it's not the house of bread in the sky, but the land where David was born, and Jesus also would be born. I mean, this is where just simple critiques, just read the Bible, and you'd realize that this doesn't work. Trying to argue that the star sequence looks like the letter M and therefore it means Mary. The problem with that is the fact that Hebrew doesn't have a letter M. Again, this works in English. But as he mentioned with the other languages, with Sanskrit or with Hindi, when you look at the Indian goddess, there's no M there. You see, it relies on an argument that only works in English. Okay? There is no M in Hebrew.
I'm dying. This is great.
This is why when I watched this, I was like, this is what these people have been arguing like so strongly. Like, is there proof that God, that Jesus doesn't exist and that Christianity is false? Is this kind of stuff? I mean, this is a great example for folks to follow, to say this is evidence of the desperation of people that want to believe something that they can't honestly argue, and they have to use these desperate means. I mean, it's this video, let's be honest, it's well done. It's great graphics, and they really do a pretty good job of trying to make the argument. The problem is it's so easily debunked. I mean, just find me the letter M in Hebrew. In fact, while we have it up on the screen, I'll show you the letter M. If you look under where it says Bethlehem, house equals house of bread, and then you see some Hebrew, the letter all the way to the left is M. That's the M sound. That's mem. That's your M. Doesn't look anything like an M, does it? It looks more like an O, if anything, in English, right? That's your M. Here's the problem. That doesn't fit what he just argued, does it? The argument is an English argument, a language that didn't exist until the I think 1200s was the first we start seeing a older English. So there was no letter M in the time of Christ or the time of the writing of the Bible, and even older in the Hebrew time, for this argument to make any sense whatsoever.
There's another very interesting phenomenon that occurs around December 25th, or the winter solstice. From the summer solstice to the winter solstice, the days become shorter and colder. And from the perspective of the northern hemisphere, the sun appears to move south and get smaller and more scarce.
Now notice again, say again, John.
I said, yeah, that's called science. That's called astronomy.
Well, again, the focus is December 25th. Most scholars believe that Jesus would have been born probably in April time frame. Okay, he would have had to have been born somewhere not in the winter, because having him in the manger, he probably wouldn't have survived the night being born in a manger. And this is one of the other things, he doesn't bring this up. Others try to bring up the argument that Jesus and Horace were both born in caves. Jesus was born in a stable, not a cave. Horace was born in a swamp, not a cave. So in that one, neither of them are right. But what you end up seeing here is you see he's still making this argument based on December 25th. And yet that right there, as he makes this argument, this becomes December 25th is so much part of his argument, and yet it's the easiest to debunk because nobody accepts that. No biblical scholars accept December 25th. No historians accept December 25th as the birth of Christ. Even the History Channel, which is never friendly to Christianity, I mean, they post it as a way of kind of knocking Christians. Why do you celebrate, December 25th, birth of Christ? So, who accepts this? Well, this guy does because his whole argument's based on it.
When approaching the winter solstice symbolized the process of death to the ancients. It was the death of the sun.
So I guess that's the death of the S-U-N or S-O-N. It's hard to know. He uses those terms interchangeably.
And by December 22nd, the sun's demise was fully realized. For the sun, having moved south continually for 6 months, makes it to its lowest point in the sky. Here a curious thing occurs. The sun stops moving south, at least perceivably, for 3 days. And during this 3-day pause, the sun resides in the vicinity of the Southern Cross, or Crux, constellation. And after this time, on December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree, this time north, foreshadowing longer days, warmth, and spring.
Okay. Now, all of that he mentions about the science is right. I mean, yeah, that does. We do have a shortening of the days, and yes, we have a lengthening of the days, but Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. So all of this in his argument is faulty because his base argument is based on Jesus Christ being born on December 25th, which again, no one accepts.
And thus it was said.
Now I do have to say, someone's saying in chat, yes, but the British accent makes it more credible, sound more credible. An accent doesn't make it true, though. And, I mean, this is the thing.
The Son died on the cross, was dead for 3 days, only to be resurrected or born again. This is why Jesus and numerous other sun gods share the crucifixion, 3-day death, and resurrection concept. It is the sun's transition period before it shifts its direction back into the northern hemisphere, bringing spring and thus salvation. However, they did not celebrate the resurrection of the sun.
Okay, so you see how he ends up using that? The 3 days are not 3 actual days where Christ is in the tomb. So the issue becomes here you end up having them saying, well, this is just a reference to some stars. And that's what the 3 days is, and that's why everybody ends up having 3 days, so they argue. And what you end up seeing is here is just a complete equivocation, because if you read the Bible, it's clearly not speaking about the sun. It's speaking of actual days. Why? Because the women come up on the 3rd day to the tomb. They're clearly coming to an actual tomb on an actual day.
Until the spring equinox, or Easter. This is because at the spring equinox, the sun officially overpowers the evil darkness, as daytime thereafter becomes longer in duration than the night, and the revitalizing conditions of spring emerge. Now, probably the most obvious of all the astrological symbolism around Jesus regards the 12 disciples. They are simply the 12 constellations of the zodiac, which Jesus, being the sun, travels about with. In fact, the number 12 is replete throughout the Bible.
Okay. So, here's where we get. How many tribes of Israel are there? 12. Okay, he's got that right. There's, now here, notice the brothers of Joseph. How many brothers of Joseph were there? There were 11 brothers of Joseph. Joseph is one of the 12 tribes.
Yeah,
Oops. Yeah. He got that wrong. 12 great patriarchs. Again, this is now this is where you end up seeing 12 tribes of Israel, 12 brothers of Joseph, and 12 great patriarchs are the same group of people.
Yeah.
And he's wrong, because they're not 12 brothers of Joseph. Joseph is one of the 12. Those are the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph was not given a portion of Israel. His 2 sons were. Levi was not given a portion of Israel because they were the teachers. And so what you end up with is that you end up having more than that. Okay. Now, 12 judges of Israel. No, that number's not right. 12 Old Testament prophets. Well, let's see. Let me count. I'm going to read off the prophets, and you guys can do the counting, right? We have Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Huh. Did that sound like 12? Or does that sound like... Sounds more like 16. Oops. And by the way, in a Jewish book, in the Jewish Bible, you wouldn't have had that many. You just have the prophets. All the minor prophets would have been one. So he's wrong there. 12 kings of Israel. No, there were more than that. 12 princes of Israel. I don't even know what that refers to. Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus at the temple at 12. Yeah, like every other boy. I mean, this is notice, to try to make his point sound more important, he takes the 12 tribes of Israel, uses that 3 different ways. His numbers don't even add up. All you got to do is count. The judges, I think there's only about 9 of them, if I remember correctly, that are mentioned in the book of Judges.
This text has more to do with astrology than anything else. Coming back to the cross of the zodiac, the figurative life of the sun, this was not just an artistic expression or tool to track the sun's movement. It was also a pagan spiritual symbol, the shorthand of which looked like this.
Okay, now I'm stopping this before he shows this. And what I want you to see is what he's showing on the screen is a circle with a whole bunch of things around it. And in the center of the circle is a cross. Now it's a cross beam. Okay, I want you to notice something, because you're going to see this. If you see inside of that circle, both sides of that cross are even. In other words, the distance from each side from the center are all the same amount. And watch what he does to try to make it look like the cross that was Jesus was crucified on. He extends it. Do you see how he did that? He extends it to try to make it look like the cross, the symbol of the cross, instead of the image that he actually had, which would have been equal lengths.
A symbol of Christianity. It is a pagan adaptation of the cross of the zodiac. This is why Jesus in early occult art is always shown with his head on the cross, for Jesus is the Son of God, the light of the world, the risen.
Okay, again, he's the Son of God. This would not work in any other language the way he just used it. And I'm pointing that over and over because he used this over and over. And we have to realize that when you look at this, this is what he's doing, and it's really kind of sad. Because just a simple thing that you have to ask yourself, does this work in other languages like Hebrew or Greek, which would have been what they would have spoken? They wouldn't have spoken English.
The Savior who will come again, as it does every morning. The glory of God who defends against the works of darkness, as he is born again every morning and can be seen coming in the clouds up in heaven with his crown of thorns or sun rays.
So the crown of thorns is really sun rays.
Where
and
did you get that from?
It's called thin air. I mean, this is just the the born again means the sun arises every morning. I mean, it's really comical that people actually believe this, and it shows, here's the reality. It shows that anybody who is believing this is so super gullible that they could believe anything. And here you got a guy that knows, obviously, that his followers would be so gullible, 3 million people would watch this, that they would hold this as proof, and yet all you got to do is simple research to figure out that this has been so debunked. We're not even halfway through the section that we want to discuss. And we found so many errors in this, it's not even funny.
Now, of the many astronomical metaphors in the Bible, one of the most important has to do with the ages. Throughout the scriptures,
this is where it's going to get fun.
To the age. In order to understand this, we need to be familiar with a phenomenon known as the precession of the equinoxes. The ancient Egyptians, along with cultures long before them, recognized that approximately every 2150 years, the sunrise on the morning of the spring equinox would occur at a different sign of the zodiac. This has to do with a slow, angular wobble that the Earth maintains as it rotates on its axis. It is called a precession because the constellations go backwards rather than through the normal yearly cycle. The amount of time it takes for precession to go through all 12 signs is roughly 25,765 years. This is also called the Great Year, and ancient societies were very aware of this, and they referred to each 2150-year period as an age. From 4300 BC to 2150 BC, it was the age of Horus, the bull. From 2150 BC to 1 AD, it was the age of Aries, the ram. And from 1 AD to 2150 AD, it is the age of Pisces, the age we are still in to this day. And in and around 2150, we will enter the new age, the age of Aquarius. Now, the Bible reflects, broadly speaking, a symbolic movement through three...
Say that again?
All of a sudden, I think of that one song.
Yeah, the Age of Aquarius. You know, and you see how much is going. You know, it's funny because someone is saying that, you know, we're so gullible if we don't believe these truths are self-evident. Yes, they're self-evident to those who wish them to be true. You know, I mean, but look at the amount of gymnastics that these guys have to do to make their argument. It's really amazing the amount of equivocation that we've seen, the amount of, you know, argumentation that they're making that's based on things that aren't true, whether it be about Jesus or whether it be about these other gods. And now the argument that really everything that's in the Bible is actually referring to stars. It's amazing.
I love how it's, what did they say, 21,500 years? But all these civilizations knew it. You know, they've been around a long time and was able to figure it out. It's a long time to try to piece things together. You have to go through even one cycle.
Yeah. Well, wait, because he's going to make some fun arguments. I mean, just like he said, the house of bread means Bethlehem means Mary. Well, wait till you see what he's going to argue with Pisces.
Ages while foreshadowing a fourth. In the Old Testament, when Moses comes down Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, he is very upset to see his people worshiping a golden bull calf. In fact, he shattered the stone tablets and instructed his people to kill each other in order to purify themselves. Most biblical scholars will attribute this anger to the fact that the Israelites were worshiping a false idol or something to that effect. The reality is, the golden bull is Taurus the bull, and Moses represents the new age of Aries the ram. This is why Jews even today still blow the ram's horn.
Okay, so they don't blow a ram's horn because it's an effective horn to be heard over long distances through battle before a time of amplification. No, that wouldn't be, just because of the fact that so many people would use horns like this for that purpose. And the ram's horns that they would use have differing, there's different horns that give you different abilities to be, of distance to be heard. He's arguing it's because they should have been in the day of the ram and not in the day of the bull. That's what it was really about. It wasn't the worship of a false god in the place of the true God. No, it's because of they were looking at the stars. Now, the argument would be is that if that was the case, why is this stuff not documented at that time? Right? Why did, you know, the assumption is that they had this belief system before they had an ability to document it. And that's why when they would look up at the stars, they knew all this stuff and developed this. And that Moses would be upset that they're not recognizing that they should be in the age of the ram when they're worshiping the age of the bull.
I just want one manuscript showing that they thought that.
Exactly.
And plenty of manuscripts saying otherwise, but you know, they want to read this into it. At least give me.
Well, okay. Let's take his argument for a second, Vincent, and ask what did Moses do? He didn't say let's kill each other, have everyone kill each other. What was the punishment for worshiping the bull? What did he do with that bull? Do you guys remember? What Moses did with the bull was he chopped it up and refined it and made it into dust and made everyone eat it. Does that mean that the Israelites actually ate the stars and there is no more, constellation of the bull? Did they actually eat it as was stated? That, you see, when you actually read the Bible and then try to make their arguments, you have several major problems. Because if they're actually just stars, that bull wasn't a bull, it was a stars, then they actually ate the stars. And there is no more constellation of the bull anymore. So, John, you got your Logos up. You want me to, son, you want to share there?
I was going to just say, how the false equivocation of the word sun, S-O-N versus S-U-N. This is the Hebrew word for sun is what I have here. And obviously the other Hebrew word for S-U-N, sun, is completely different. I mean, if you were to ask any Hebrew scholar, I don't think you need a Hebrew scholar. Anyone can look that those words don't look anything alike. Yeah.
Okay. One is got one letter, the shay, with one vowel, and the other has a Balef and a nun with a vowel. So not a single letter there is the same.
Right. So it's ridiculous to even say that ancient history could get those two words mixed up. I mean, it's ridiculous to even assume that. So anyway,
I bet you they don't even sound alike either, but I don't know Hebrew to tell you.
I don't know either.
Well, the sun, S-O-N, is bar.
Oh yeah,
okay,
bar.
The one
right.
you have there on your
Artemis
is right. Bar, and sun there, and it's going to be a sh sound, but I forget. I think it's sha would be I think that's the aleph sound. I forget the vowel there. I think the three dots, I think, is an A sound. So if you with your Logos, if you had the pronunciations, you could just hit pronunciation, but
I don't have it because I'm poor.
Dude, why does he disregard, like you said, the whole the biblical narrative of it? We have writing of that. Why does he read in this whole astrological stuff and even though the people at the time, or is he saying they were just lying at the time and writing this?
Well, notice
what's the logic? I mean, I don't get it.
Well, here's you end up seeing he refutes himself now, right? In the first part of this video, the first 15 minutes, he was arguing that December 25th, an actual day, the virgin birth, actual virgin, right? The resurrection was an actual resurrection. He's trying to argue all these similarities and saying that they're all the same. Now he's arguing they're all something that refer to the stars. So what you have is where before he's trying to make the case that these were equal in literalness. Now he's saying, well, really, they're all figurative. You see, so he can't even stay consistent with his own argument. Were they actually born on December 25th or were they not? Were they actually resurrected or were they not? This is where you end up in this dilemma. And he the equivocation of sun, S-U-N versus sun, S-O-N, the fact that he can't seem to get the things straight here on whether there were three kings or not, whether Jesus was born on December 25th. I mean, his arguments are all based on falsehoods, and then he doesn't even worry that that's false. He just moves on and continues with his argument. And I would say whether if you're a Christian making arguments like this, or you're a professing atheist making arguments like this, it's bad. If your argument requires falsehoods, it's not valid. It's not true. So this is going to get entertaining.
Represents the new age of
Did you have something? You had more you want to say?
It's odd that he would just disregard all the literature from the religion to try and imply that that it, you know, is equivocal to all these other religions when we have actual writings, why that say otherwise. So, I mean, he has to disregard the religion's writings themselves in order to make these arguments. It's kind of...
Well, yeah, it's like all you had to do is go to any synagogue and ask them, is the word son, S-O-N, ever confused of S-U-N in Hebrew? I mean, and the you know, the guy in the synagogue would probably just say, no, they're two separate words, completely different definitions.
What I'm saying, it's like the whole, you know, Moses and the this is just equivocating to the stars and all. Just, it's why is that not in their scriptures then, if they even allude to it?
You would think they would allude to it a lot more if this is what they were trying to argue, that all these religions would allude to it a lot clearer than they do. I mean, the argument is based on ancient Egyptian, which, you know, anybody who has done research in that area, even a little bit, it's extremely difficult. It's a dead language. It's based on hieroglyphics. They're doing a lot of interpretation into what they think is made, and yet he argues as if it's clear. That's a problem. So we got a couple more minutes of this. Let's see how far we can go.
Big time major league bullshit.
Oh, wait, hold on. Forgive me for that. Something just happened with...
You started over again. Shoot.
Yeah.
Where were we at? Like, keep going. No, we weren't there yet. Or were we? I don't know.
Yeah, here's the Age of Aquarius.
The Age of Aquarius.
Jesus, it will go into the house of Aquarius, as Aquarius follows Pisces in the precession of the Equinoxes. All Jesus is saying is that after the age of Pisces will come the age of Aquarius. Now, we have all heard about the end times and the end of the world. The cartoonish depictions in the book of Revelation aside, the main source of this idea comes from Matthew 28:20, where Jesus says, I will be with you even to the end of the world.
Did you catch that earlier? The cartoons and the depictions that we have seen earlier. So he refers to them as cartoons.
Yeah. Which I didn't pick up on that. Let's see if we can get back to where we were.
Just 30 seconds or so, yeah.
A plagiarization of the Egyptian sun god Horus. For example, inscribed about 3,500 years ago on the walls at the Temple of Luxor in Egypt are images of the Annunciation, the Immaculate Conception, the birth, and the adoration of Horus. The images.
Okay, now notice he's showing hieroglyphics. He's going to go into each of these, and this won't work to those who are listening on the podcast, but it's ancient hieroglyphics. He's reading into it what he wants to be seen. What you see is pictures. You see pictures of a birth. There's nothing that depicts that it's a miracle birth. It's a birth. And yet he reads into it the idea of a miracle. Okay.
Announcing to the Virgin Isis
so
that she will conceive Horus.
You just have a picture of
impregnating the Virgin.
You know,
and then the
two pictures with a woman.
This is exactly the story of Jesus's miracle.
You don't have the similarity that you have with the Jesus story.
Between the Egyptian religion and the Christian religion are staggering.
Now here, watch what he does here. Now, notice what he does, and we can do this when we can stop it. But just look at what we have on screen. He's going to show the huge number of similarities, and notice what he has. The ritual book of resurrection equals the book of Revelation. How? He's going to, you know, Isus, the coming of Isis, who was great with Isus or Usa, equals Jesus. How? See, this is again where just if you could watch, if you see the screen, he just shows this long list, but you could stop it at almost any point, as I just did, and you end up seeing that these things don't work. Right? It's just a long list to make it look like there's all this evidence, and yet it's deception. He's deceiving his own followers into making it sound like there's all this evidence.
Is continuous. The story of Noah and Noah's Ark is taken directly from tradition. The concept of the Great Flood is ubiquitous throughout the ancient world.
Okay, so this is an interesting thing that comes up often. The fact that the Noah's flood is ubiquitous throughout the ancient world. That's true. There is similarities that we see in those accounts. Why? Very simply, because there was an actual flood.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it was an actual account in history.
Yeah, and why do we have different accounts of it? Because there was a Tower of Babel where people are spread all around the world. And what you have is the fact that there's the similarities is actually the problem for people that try to dispute that there was an actual flood. How do you have all these people in all these areas having all the details the same? Now, you see, here's the interesting thing. What he was arguing before is that there's all these similarities, which he had to manufacture. They're not actually there. And so those similarities don't actually exist. And he argues that because there's this similarities, therefore, if one's a myth, they're all a myth. Well, the reality is that the reason you have these similarities with Noah's flood is because it actually happened. And they're recounting what was told and what was passed down from generation to generation. The fact that there's the similarities is because the event actually happened. That's why.
200 cited claims in different periods and times. However, one need look no further for a pre-Christian source than the Epic of Gilgamesh, written in 2600 BC. This story talks of a great flood commanded by God, an ark with saved animals upon it, and even the release and return of a dove, all held in common with the biblical story, among many other similarities. And then there is the plagiarized story of Moses. Upon Moses' birth, it is said that he was placed in a reed basket and set adrift in a river in order to avoid infanticide. He was later rescued by a daughter of royalty and raised by her as a prince. This baby in a basket story was lifted directly from the myth of Sargon of Akkad of around 2250 BC. Sargon was born, placed in a reed basket in order to avoid infanticide, and set adrift in a river. He was in turn rescued and raised by Aki, a royal midwife. Furthermore, Moses is known as the lawgiver, the giver of the Ten Commandments, the Mosaic Law. However, the idea of a law being passed from God to a prophet up on a mountain is also a very old motif. Moses is just another lawgiver in a long line of lawgivers in mythological history. In India, Manu was the great lawgiver.
Okay, so the fact that there's lawgivers, should that, I mean, does that discount anything? Right?
No, not at all.
Yeah, the question is, with Manu of India or any of these others, are they getting this from God? Well, no, they wouldn't in India, where they would believe that there is no one God. There was a multitude gods, and we're all gods. And therefore, right there, you see a difference. It's really quite interesting, because here again, you're the equivocation of the idea of a lawgiver. Moses was a lawgiver because he got the law directly from God and gave it to the people. There's a difference there than someone that just comes up with law.
You can have it.
Okay.
Mute.
We're gonna. Well,
Jerry, let her have it. James, don't let.
Gave him the sacred laws. While in Egypt,
I actually almost ejected Vincent by accident.
Yeah.
Well, I'm yelling at some kids right now anyway, so.
Minos, Nises, Moses. As far as the Ten Commandments, they are taken outright from spell 125 in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. What the Book of the Dead phrased, "I have not stolen," became "Thou shalt not steal." "I have not killed."
Now, why is it that we have these kind of laws? Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie. Why is it that every culture, and this is the question, why is it that every culture, not just the Egyptians, not just Israel, why do all these cultures have these kind of laws? Can you guys tell me?
Because they're written on man's heart.
Exactly. Exactly. The reason we have the same basic laws in every culture, everywhere, is because God wrote these on our hearts. That's, so the fact that there's, we have the same laws. Yes, because of what the Bible says, that God created us in his image with the fact that he gave us a conscience and we know right from wrong. that doesn't prove your arguments. Now we get into baptism. This becomes funny because remember, as we get into this, that baptism does not exist outside of the Jewish culture. Baptism was a ritual of a Gentile becoming a Jew. When a Gentile would become a Jew, he would be cleansed and fully immersed into water, and that was the ritual of a Gentile becoming a Jew. This was what John the Baptist was doing, which was why it was so unusual, because what he was doing was a ritual of saying that Gentiles were becoming Jews, but he was doing it to Jews. That aside, when he speaks of baptism, and he's going to talk about it in ancient times, remember, totally different. He's just referring to water. Bathing, taking a bath, getting into a river and submerging yourself underwater is not a baptism. It's a bath.
Judgment, virgin birth, death and resurrection, crucifixion, the Ark of the Covenant, circumcision, saviors, Holy Communion, Great Flood, Easter, Christmas, Passover, and many, many more are all attributes of Egyptian ideas long predating Christianity and Judaism. Justin Martyr, one of the first Christian historians and defenders, wrote, "When we say that he, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was produced without sexual union, was crucified and died and rose again, and ascended into heaven, we propound nothing different from what you believe regarding those who you esteem sons of Jupiter." In a different writing, Justin Martyr said,
okay, so now look at what he's trying to argue. He's trying to argue that, see, they make this argument for Jupiter. Okay, and he's trying to argue the same thing. Now, I didn't look at Justin to see the context of this, but just based on what he's shown already, context is not something he looks and puts a lot of value in. He's looking for some quote he can grab. Just because I should have looked up the context of this one, but let's take it at face value. Do we see the sons of Jupiter having the same claims that we see that he's arguing here? No, we don't. So the argument here is that doesn't fit with what we know of the sons of Jupiter. So the context is going to tell me that there's something else there.
I was going to say also, he just said right before he talked about Justin Martyr, he said that Christianity was all borrowed from Egyptian history or Egyptian religions. Then he goes over to Justin Martyr and he talks about the sons of Jupiter. Sons of Jupiter, Jupiter's, I think, is a Greek god, nothing to do at all with Egyptian religion whatsoever.
Yeah.
So another false equivocation.
Well, he's trying to argue they're all the same. That's really what he's trying to argue.
Said, he was born of a virgin. Accept this in common with what you believe of Perseus. It's obvious that Justin and other early Christians knew how similar Christianity was to the pagan religions. However, Justin had a solution. As far as he was concerned, the devil did it. The devil had the foresight to come before Christ and create his characteristics in the pagan world.
Now, if I grab any New York Times article, I can grab single quotes and make it say anything I pretty much want, can I? And that's the reality. What you end up seeing here is that you have someone that is just taking something and grabbing a quote here, a quote there. It's called proof texting. You got to look at these things in context and see if that's actually what he's saying.
Well, if we looked at the quote that he said, he actually misquoted it. He said in his, as a voiceover, he said the devil, whereas the actual quote says the devils of such and such. I'm not sure what it said, but so he actually misquoted it, and that has a different context. When you're saying either the person, the devil.
Well, let's hold on. Let's just read it.
Okay.
Let's look at it.
It's obvious that Justin and other early Christians knew how similar Christianity was to the pagan religions. However, Justin had a solution. As far as he was concerned, the devil did it.
Okay, so here's what it actually says. The devils craftily feigned that Nirvana was the daughter of Jupiter, not bisexual union. Let's listen to what he says.
The devil had the foresight to come before Christ and create his characteristics in the pagan world.
Yep, that's not what it said. You're right.
Yeah, he completely misquoted it and applied the devil, Satan, as what Justin Martyr said was the devils. I think it's a different context, saying that, evil people basically is what he's referring to probably.
Fundamentalist Christianity, fascinating. These people actually believe the world is 12,000 years old.
Let's correct that. We believe it's 6,000 years old. Maybe 7.
Yeah, 6 or 7.
I actually asked one of these guys. Okay, dinosaur.
And by the way, when you have to resort to relying on comedians, I guess maybe you're just a joke.
Dinosaur fossils. He says, dinosaur fossils? God put those here to test our faith. I think God put you here to test my faith, dude.
Now, though that's a funny line, how does he explain dinosaur fossils and the fact that we don't have anything in between the dinosaurs? We just have all the dinosaurs fully formed, along with everything else fully formed. There's no transitional forms, and yet there should be billions and billions of transitional forms. We should see lots of them. We shouldn't see dinosaurs without any transitional forms, and then they're just gone. And then we see everything else we see today fully formed and nothing in between. Just saying.
On a side note, I do find it funny that professor had to settle. I mean, they settled with that professor who found soft dinosaur tissue.
That's right. They just recently, there was a recent case. Yeah. The school fired a professor because he found soft tissue in dinosaur bones and argued that therefore since the tissue can't last millions of years, dinosaurs must not have been that old. And they fired him for his religious belief. That was why he was fired, because he was arguing for religion. And all he was doing was looking at the evidence. Now what they did, to be fair, what they did was they settled with him in a 6-figure settlement because they fired him. I believe he was even tenured and he shouldn't have been fired, but they fired him based on religious grounds. And their argument was that they settled because they didn't want to have a long and costly embattlement lawsuit. And so they said that his arguments still are not scientific and religious in nature. And yet they can't combat what he actually found, soft tissue in dinosaurs.
It attacks their deep time theory, so they have to deny it.
Yeah. Yeah. Dinosaurs are a real problem for evolution.
The Bible is nothing more than an astrotheological literary hybrid, just like nearly all religious myths before it. In fact, the aspect of
notice the category error, right? I mean, the error of generalization. Just because the others are myths doesn't mean this is. Okay. What he's done is to prove it, and this is the thing again. When you take an argument logically, if the premise is false, then the conclusion is false. His argument is false because, as we've shown over and over again, his underlying argument is based on a falsehood. And therefore, his conclusion cannot be true. And so that's speaking when he speaks of Christianity. And then so now he's equivocating all of them and say, well, these others are myths. Well, we agree the others are myths. But that doesn't mean Christianity is the myth, and that's where he equivocates.
Transference of one character's attributes to a new character can be found within the book itself. In the Old Testament, there is the story of Joseph. Joseph was a prototype for Jesus. Joseph was born of a miracle birth. Jesus was born of a miracle birth.
Okay. Joseph was not born of a miracle birth. He was born with a father and a mother, like every other human being, just late in life. A woman who was barren for many years. That's not a miracle. I know many people. I have someone in my church who they were trying to have children and chose not to go through the medical routes. And it took them several years, almost a dozen years, before they could have a child. And they had a child. It wasn't a miracle. It was just that they had a child later in life. That's not a miracle birth. That's not a virgin birth. Notice how he just says miracle birth to miracle birth, but one is a natural birth, one's a supernatural birth.
Joseph was of 12 brothers. Jesus had 12 disciples.
Okay, Joseph didn't have 12 brothers. Okay, notice this. Joseph had 11 brothers. Okay, Jesus had 12 disciples. Those aren't brothers, and he wasn't one of them. Joseph was one of the 12. Notice how hard he's trying to make this similar.
Sold for 30 pieces of silver. Brother Judah suggests the sale of Joseph. Disciple Judas suggests the sale of Jesus. Joseph began his...
Okay, Judah and Judas in English. That doesn't mean that the names are the same in Hebrew or in Greek, since Judah would have been a Jewish name, a Hebrew name. Judas, though similar in our English spelling, is not the same in the Hebrew.
Work at the age of 30. Jesus began his work at the age of 30. The parallels go on and on.
Okay. Joseph began his work at the age of 30. What work? You see, Joseph is mentioned as 30 years old when he gets out of prison. But notice that that's not his work when he begins. He was working in Potiphar's house before that. So we see him working before 30.
Furthermore, is there any non-biblical historical evidence of any person living with the name Jesus, the son of Mary, who traveled about with 12 followers, healing people and the like? There are numerous historians who lived in and around the Mediterranean, either during or soon after the assumed life of Jesus. How many of these historians document this figure? Not one.
Wrong. Okay, not one. Well, let's see. Does he mention anything about the Talmud, which was written at the time by the Jewish people? No, he doesn't have that in his list. And yet many, many rabbis within the Talmud refer to Jesus by name. Now notice how he was very specific. Judas, son of Mary. Why does he say it that way? Because when they refer to Jesus, did I say Judas? That's error. Bad error. Jesus, son of Mary. Literally that way. But if they mention Jesus, he says, well, they didn't mention him, Jesus, son of Mary. That gives him the wiggle room. Well, Josephus he's going to argue in a minute that Josephus has been discredited, yet that's just arguments that the atheists come up with because they don't like the conclusions that it proves. He also doesn't mention Philo, not in that list. Doesn't mention all the Jewish rabbis who would have been the ones writing at this time on this. Notice, this was something in the time of and in the area of Jerusalem. That's who had been writing on it. So who are you going to go to? Greeks far, far away? Or are you going to go to those who would have been in the area writing and would have had the issue of Christ? Look to the Talmud and you're going to see that he's mentioned often. And he mentions Philo, and yet Philo does mention Jesus, just not Jesus, son of Mary, along with many of these others.
However, to be fair, that doesn't mean defenders of the historical Jesus haven't claimed the contrary. 4 historians are typically referenced to justify Jesus' existence. Pliny the Younger, Suetonius, and Tacitus are the first 3. Each one of their entries consists of only a few sentences at best, and only referred to Christus or the Christ, which in fact is not a name but a title. It means the anointed one. The 4th...
Okay, an anointed one which is only referred to as one person. But the fact is like I said, they wouldn't have been mentioning this in areas. They wouldn't have to focus on that because they would have focused on the history of their area. The Jews are the ones you want to go to.
Source is Josephus, and this source has been proven to be a forgery for hundreds of years. Sadly, it is still cited as truth.
Cited as truth.
Oh, so that was it. That was it.
Yeah.
Sadly, it was prove it. Prove it. It was not true.
And this is the thing. So many people will argue based on what he just said. Well, it's been debunked, but no one's given that evidence. And it's interesting. The only thing that has been debunked supposedly is the references to Christ. Nothing else of his historical accounts are debunked. He's right on everything else historically, except for where he mentioned that Jesus died and rose again.
ascended into heaven for all eyes to see and performed the wealth of miracles acclaimed to him would have made it into the historical record. It didn't, because once the evidence is weighed, there are very high odds that the figure known as Jesus did not even exist.
Oh, come on.
Yeah. So we just ignore all of the actual evidence, like all of the eyewitness evidence from the writers of the New Testament, all the people from that wrote in the Talmud that were eyewitnesses. Ignore all of them. Ignore all that, and then we can be fine. It's kind of like the global warming. As long as if we ignore all the evidence of the effect the sun has and the magnetic force, and we ignore everything and only look at what the effect humans have, then we come to the realization that humans have the effect. Well, yeah, as long as you ignore all the other evidence, you're going to come to that conclusion because it's the only one left.
Even liberal scholars agree that he was at least a historical figure. It's ridiculous to say that he's just a myth. I mean, that is the height of stupidity, in my opinion.
Even Bart Ehrman, who used to be a Christian and he left.
No, he was never a Christian.
Well, yeah, I know, you know what I mean. But he claimed to be a Christian, and then all of a sudden, yeah, it's like he even says, it's like, there's no doubt at all that Jesus actually existed. He just doesn't claim to be God, Son of God.
Oh, look who finally graced us with his presence. Hello, Calvin Klein.
How's it going, guys? That was amazing. Thank you, Andrew, for putting this together. I'm sorry I'm late.
Yeah, I know. You're busy working on your wedding plans. I know. Let's continue. And what he has up here, what he says here is the Christian religion is a parody on worship of the Sun, S-U-N, in which they put a man called Christ in the place of the Sun, S-U-N, and pay him the adoration originally paid to the Sun, S-U-N. Notice again, this, as we brought up earlier, the equivocation of the word S-U-N and S-O-N. Jesus was called, and by the way, notice who this was, Thomas Paine in 1800s. 1800s. You have to argue. Give us historians of the first century that make this claim, not 1800 years later.
And here's the deal. A lot of the evidence that they try to pull from comes from the time of after Christ, probably hundreds of years after Christ, that some of these other religions can even be said to borrow from Christianity to make their mystery religions that these guys are trying to pull in and make Christians come from.
When you actually look at the sources that this guy bases the arguments on, they're all much, much later, like in the 1700s, 1800s.
They do not reference any original sources to make these claims. It's always secondary, third, tertiary. Original sources do not back up the claims of this video. It's pure fiction.
Yep.
We want to be factual. We don't want to cause hurt feelings, but we want to be academically correct in what we understand and know to be true.
Okay, that's just too funny. After everything we've just seen, he wants to be factually true. That's where you just have to realize this movie is a joke. It started with a comedian, ended with a joke.
Christianity just is not based on truth. We find that Christianity was in fact nothing more than a Roman story developed politically.
The reality is Jesus was the solar deity of the Gnostic Christian sect. And like all other pagan gods, he was a mythical figure. It was the political establishment that sought to historize the Jesus figure for social control.
Now we're getting into the side of conspiracy theorists. Conspiracy theorists is now he is. He's now wavering on that side now, where he's saying, no, it was just a complete, made up story, just for governmental.
What was the movie recently? I forget the name of it. With Tom Hanks.
Oh, you're talking about the really horrible movie, the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah. I mean, that's what that's like.
Yeah, which again is based, and that's really interesting when you look at that one. Da Vinci Code is based off of the Gospel according to Mary Magdalene, and when you actually look at that, I mean, just looking at it, first off, this is a gospel that's found. We have one manuscript of it where there's page numbers and there's more pages missing than we actually have, and it's in French. So it's not from the 1st century, you know, and yet they've developed a whole book and movie based off that. All right, let's finish this one up, and then I want to play a couple quick videos that answer this really hilariously, but answer this movie.
Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea. It was during this meeting that the politically motivated Christian doctrines were established, and thus began a long history of Christian bloodshed and spiritual fraud.
Okay, so off of that, anyone that understands the Council of Nicaea knows that many of these arguments, the doctrines, had been developed before that. It was codifying things that were already developed. So this goes into a lack of understanding. Just read the Council of Nicaea and actually read what happened, and you would know that. But facts don't seem important to this guy.
And for the next 1600 years, the Vatican maintained a political stranglehold on all of Europe, leading to such joyous periods as the Dark Ages, along with enlightening events such as the Crusades and the Inquisition. Christianity, along with all other theistic belief systems, is the fraud of the age. It serves to detach the species from the natural world, and likewise each other. It supports blind submission to authority. It reduces human responsibility to the effect that God controls everything, and in turn, awful crimes can be justified in the name of divine pursuit.
Okay, so here the quote that he puts up there is, religion can never reform mankind because religion is slavery. And yet he had to lie throughout this entire movie to make that point. So that's the end of part 1. Let's look. Is there a quick refutation to this? Well, I want to play a couple of them. And this first one is from Lutheran satire, Horace Ruins Christmas. I'm going to play this without comment. I'll play it a little bit quicker so we can get through it at 1.5 speed. But here we go without comment.
Well, thanks to all of you for coming out to our service this morning, and I pray that the rest of this Christmas day is wonderful for each and every one of you.
Not so fast, preacher man. Behold, it is I, Horus, Egyptian god of the sun, and while you all believe that you've been celebrating the birth of your Lord Jesus, you've really been celebrating the birth of me. For you see, thousands of years before your Jesus came around, I, Horus, was born on December 25th. I, Horus, was born of a virgin. I, Horus, was baptized by a man called Enoch the Baptizer, was crucified and was resurrected 3 days later. So you see, your Jesus is nothing more than plagiarized poppycock, and I, Horus, have come to feast upon the sorrow of you foolish Christians.
Yeah, none of the stuff you just said is true.
Yes, it is.
No, there's no reference in Egyptian mythology to Horus being crucified or resurrected 3 days later. There's no documentation anywhere for the existence of a figure named Enoch the Baptizer. Horus's mother was not a virgin woman, but the goddess Isis, and there is no specific date anywhere tied to the birth of Horus.
I'm pretty sure there is.
Actually, no. All of these claims and many others indicating that early Christians yoinked the mythology of Horus and stuck it on top of Jesus were all completely made up by Gerald Massey, a 19th century cuckoo banana bird self-taught Egyptologist who never provided the slightest shred of evidence for any of these claims and who was laughed out of the room by every serious Egyptologist on the planet. So thank you very much for your attempt to ruin our celebration of Christ's birth, but I'm afraid we're all still having a very Merry Christmas, Horus.
Horus? Did I say my name was Horus? No. What I meant to say was, behold, it is I, Mithras, Roman cultic god of the something. And while you all believe that you've been celebrating the birth of Jesus, you've really been celebrating the birth of me. For you see, I, Mithras, was born of a virgin. I, Mithras, had 12 disciples. And I, Mithras, gave those disciples a meal consisting of my body and my blood. Sound familiar, Christian dummies?
Actually, Mithras was born from a rock, not of a virgin. He had 2 companions, not 12 disciples, and the Mithraic meal was one he shared with the sun god, where they feasted not on his own flesh, but on the flesh of a bull. But even if those claims were true, Christians were already confessing the virgin birth, recognizing the 12 apostles, and celebrating the Lord's Supper before they ever encountered any Mithraic cults. So I'm afraid that you've taken neither the holly nor the jolly out of our Christmas, Mithras.
Oh, you must have misheard me. I'm not Mithras. I'm Quetzalcoatl, Aztec god of the wind. And while you all think that you've been...
No Christian on the face of the planet ever heard of Quetzalcoatl until the 16th century.
Then I'm Balder, Norse god of the...
There were 193 popes before Balder's mythology was actually written down.
Then I'm Horus, Egyptian god of the sun.
You already did that one.
All right, fine. I didn't want to completely humiliate you, but you've left me no choice. I shall now unveil myself to be the ancient deity whose mythology was inarguably stolen by early Christians. Behold, I am
the ancient Mesopotamian god of judgment. 6,000 years before your Jesus spoke of returning to condemn the lost and resurrect the faithful, my followers proclaimed, I will return to destroy my enemies and raise the dead. O silent or joyful voices, Christians, your Lord is nothing but a cheap god, and I am me. Who knows my many names? I am Volguus Roha. I am Lord of the Zebulia. I am Dozer the Dozerian.
Dozer the Dozerian is from Ghostbusters.
Dang it, why do so many people still know that movie?
Love that.
I don't understand. If all the things that Gerald Massey said about me were complete fabrications, with no textual evidence whatsoever, why do atheists like Bill Maher reference these claims as if they were true?
Well, Horace, I suppose it is strange that people who insist that they won't believe anything without verifiable evidence are more than willing to believe anything without verifiable evidence, as long as that thing can be used to mock the gospel. But we shouldn't be surprised when people reject proof of Christ's resurrection in favor of demonstrable lies that let them remain in unbelief. After all, Jesus did say, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead.
I said that before Jesus did.
Oh, you absolutely did not.
You gotta love Lutheran satire, but here's another one that I want to play a little bit more serious.
Was Jesus based on the Egyptian god Horus? Many mysticists claim Jesus never existed. It was just a copy of
Okay, what is...
Okay,
Hold
Patrick,
on.
tell us a bit more about this atheism thing. Yeah, Patrick, tell
Oh,
us.
hold on, we got something playing. Sorry about that. Let me rewind that for you folks.
Which translates to Joseph.
I'm impressed. I like how many.
Was Jesus based on the Egyptian
Say
god
again?
Horus? Many mysticists claim Jesus never existed. It was just a copy of the deity Horus. They claim there are several parallels which prove this, such as Horus was born of a virgin Isis on December 25th in a cave. A star in the east announced his birth, and he was visited by 3 wise men. He had an earthly father named Seb, which translates to Joseph. He was baptized by Anup the Baptizer. He had 12 disciples. He performed miracles, like walking on water, and raised El-Osiris from the dead. He gave a Sermon on the Mount, was crucified between 2 thieves, buried for 3 days, and was resurrected. He was called Christ, Anointed One, the Way, the Truth, and the Light, Messiah, Son of Man, and many other titles that are applied to Jesus. So it is pretty clear the story of Jesus is just a myth copied from the deity Horus. Well, that might be true if any of these claims about Horus were in fact true. The fact is, most of this nonsense is a lie, and we can't find it anywhere in ancient Egyptian literature. First off, Horus's mother Isis was not a virgin, and was actually married to Horus's father, Osiris, and she is shown in depictions as a falcon, hovering over an erect Osiris. There is no reason to think Isis was a virgin, as most Egyptologists do not even claim this. One legend even has Isis sleeping with the dead body of Osiris, and Horus was conceived from that. So there is no reason to think Horus was born of a virgin. There is also no evidence Horus was born in a cave, let alone a manger. James Fraser says Horus was born in a swamp, and there is no evidence of a star in the east or 3 wise men. Let's also remember in the Gospels, it doesn't say 3 wise men visited Jesus. It says an untold amount of magi visited Christ after his birth, but it never says 3. As for December 25th, this also cannot be confirmed. One reference has Horus being born in November, whereas Plutarch says Horus was said to have been born around the winter solstice, but there is no evidence for the 25th in particular. Also, Jesus was never confirmed to have been born on December 25th. It was just an estimate based on early calculations, but never confirmed or written in the New Testament. Seb was never said to be Horus's earthly father. In fact, Seb was a god, the god of the earth, or the earth itself, and there is no linguistic connection to the name of Joseph. Some references say Seb was the father of Osiris, not Horus. There is no Egyptian scholar who has ever heard of Anup the Baptizer. This was just made up out of thin air by mysticists. Horus was never said to have 12 disciples. Some legends say he had 4, and some just say he had an untold amount. Horus did perform miracles, but that would be expected from any deity. As for walking on water, there is no evidence of this. He also didn't raise Osiris from the dead. Osiris didn't come back to life, but remained in the underworld to serve as god of the dead. Plus, there is no evidence Osiris was ever referred to with the prefix El. This is just not true in Egyptian mythology. There is no evidence Horus gave a Sermon on the Mount, no evidence he was crucified, let alone between two thieves, no evidence he was buried, and no evidence he was resurrected. He was never called Christ, Anointed One, the Way, the Truth, and the Light, or any of these titles commonly associated with Jesus. Modern mysticists have simply lied, or lack any ability to do accurate research, because all of these supposed claims about Horus simply do not exist in Egyptian mythology. And until these mysticists provide actual original source evidence for these claims, there is no reason to believe them. So since that is the case, there is no evidence Jesus was a myth based on Horus.
Okay, and I'm going to play one more.
Was Jesus based on the Egyptian god?
All right, I want to play one more, and this is actually more of a scholarly work. This is Dr. Mark Foreman. This is, he's got a lot of research into this. Just a short clip of, and I'm going to speed it up to 1.25 just so we can get through it quicker. And after this, we'll probably end up ending, but he goes through this pretty quickly about the parallels between Jesus and some of those Egyptian gods that they were arguing.
This is an old idea. Okay, there's nothing really new here. Sometimes somebody will present this like, wow, isn't this a new thing and such like that. But this has actually been around for a long time. In the 19th century, there was a movement in Germany called the History of Religions School. That movement went on there. And the purpose of that movement was trying to demonstrate that all religions of the world basically are related and came together from one other religion. And this was a common tactic, to look at the parallels between all the different religions of the world, to try to trace the fact that they all were basically related together in some way or another. But this particular movement, folks, was just simply, by the 1930s, it completely died out. It's because scholars simply said there's just simply no evidence for that claim whatsoever. And many of the sources that we actually saw cited there in the Zeitgeist movie come from the 19th century, and many of the writers that were part of this kind of thinking that was going on at the time here. For example, Gerald Massey was a 19th century poet and amateur Egyptologist. He wrote two works, The Historical Jesus and the Mystical Christ, and Ancient Egypt, the Light of the World. Thomas Doane wrote Bible Myths and Their Parallels in Other Religions, published in 1882. And of course, probably one of the most famous is James Frazer's The Golden Bough, a multi-volume work where he tried to draw all of this together, published in 1890 here. 40% of the citations used to support the 7 minutes that you just saw there come from these resources. Okay, all these 19th century sources that have really been abandoned by scholars. My second fallacy is what I call the terminology fallacy. Basically, this fallacy says events in the lives of the mythical gods are expressed using Christian terminology, in order subtly to manipulate viewers into accepting that the same events in the life of Jesus also happen in the lives of the other mythical gods. Look at all the terminology they use to describe that. How much of that comes from Christianity? Baptism, crucified, resurrected. Do we see these words in other religions? No, not at all. Okay, they're not there at all. They just use those words to describe some event in that other religion that's kind of like what Jesus did, and then they say, see, it's the same thing. That's where they got it from in some way or another. Let's take a look at just a few of these, if I can, for a moment here. First of all, virginal births. Let's talk about that. We saw all these gods that were born of a virgin. Okay, in fact, is that really true? Well, Horus. How did Horus come about? Okay, well, Horus actually, the story of the creation of Horus is actually somewhat complex. One of the things you need to understand is that unlike Christianity, which we have a pretty good basic story of Jesus, ancient pagan myths, oftentimes the story is incomplete, it's complex, there's different versions of it out there, sometimes completely different versions of it out there, okay? And it's really hard to put it together, okay, in some way or another. So for example, Horus, the most common version of the creation of Horus, okay, is that his father, okay, was killed by Set. Okay, Osiris was his father. He was killed by Oset. Oset cut his body up into 13 parts and spread the 13 parts throughout Egypt. His mother, Isis, went around gathering the 13 parts of Osiris together. She found 12 of them, but couldn't find the 13th part, which was his phallus. Okay, so what she did was she took a stick of wood, she created a wooden phallus, okay, put it in place of his phallus, then she hovered above Horus, okay, or Osiris, excuse me, hovered above Osiris and became pregnant, and that's where we get Horus from. Okay, that's hardly a virginal birth. Bizarre. Okay, how about Attis? Where did Attis come from? Well, with Attis, the story of the birth of Attis is very simple. Zeus, the god Zeus, spills his seed on a mountain, okay, and then Non, the mother of Attis, basically sits down. The seed grows up and becomes a pomegranate tree. She sits down under the pomegranate falls from the tree into her lap. She's pregnant. Okay, virgin conception. Okay, is the idea that behind that. Okay, how about Krishna? Well, Krishna's mother Devaki had 7 children before Krishna. Don't think she was a virgin. Don't think so. Okay, these guys weren't virgin births at all. They weren't anything like the birth of Jesus. All of the virgin births, all of the supposed virgin births of the gods, all involve some sort of physical type of relationship between one physical being and another physical being. They're not at all like what we read concerning the virgin birth of Jesus. What about the crucifixion? Okay, we're told that all these gods were crucified. Well, is that true? Well, Krishna was shot in the heel with an arrow, okay? Hardly a crucifixion. There's a piercing. Well, see? Crucifixion. See? It's the same thing. Okay? Attis castrated himself, fled into the woods, and died. Well, he spilled his blood. Okay, like Jesus. Crucifixion. Okay? Horus, well, again, depends upon the story. There's 3 different deaths of Horus. Either he never died at all, or he was stung by a scorpion, or his death sometimes is conflated with Osiris. Sometimes the Horus-Osiris story is complex. We're not sure if they're talking about Osiris, Horus, or whether the two of them are the same being. They could be. We're just not sure. There's just too much information we don't know. How about a resurrection here? Well, again, Horus is made lord of the underworld. Hardly a resurrection. Okay, that's the point. He never returns to this world, never returns to life in this world. Okay, Attis was turned into a pine tree. Hardly a resurrection. Okay, Krishna, earliest tradition says he returned to the spirit world. In fact, the tradition that says Krishna resurrected was a tradition that developed about the 7th century. At that particular point, well, it's the 7th century, but it's 700 years after Christ. Okay, and many Hindu scholars will tell you that that story about Krishna was probably borrowed from Christianity, not the other way around. Okay, in fact, this quote comes from Jonathan Smith, who wrote an article on Dying and Rising Gods for the Encyclopedia of the Religion. Now, the Encyclopedia of Religion is a very scholarly work, and he makes this comment here. He said, all of the deities that have been identified as belonging to the class of dying and rising deities can be subsumed under 2 larger classes of disappearing deities or dying deities. In the first case, the deities return but have not died. In the second case, the gods die but do not return. There is no, and I repeat, no unambiguous instance in the history of religions, he's talking about the pagan religions, of dying and rising deities. None, not one. We just don't have that.
Okay, and this is later in that same discussion, but it's
well, I want you to take a journey with me. We're going to go 2,000 years into the future. Let me go on the right slide here. 2,000 years in the future, after a cataclysmic event. Okay, we've had some sort of cataclysmic event, World War 4000, whatever. Okay, only a handful of documents are now left in the world for us to kind of piece together the history of the 20th century. Okay, the life of somebody comes up with a theory that the life of John F. Kennedy is a myth. Didn't really happen. It was based on the Lincoln myth, another myth that didn't really happen. Now, why do they say that? Look at the parallels. Okay, Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1806. Kennedy was 1846. Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Ooh. Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. Lincoln and Kennedy each have 7 letters in their names. Okay? Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy. Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln. By the way, that's not true at all. Right? Lincoln did not have a secretary. Kennedy did have a secretary named Lincoln, but Lincoln had no secretary named Kennedy. That's just made up. Okay? People are like, okay, if they pagan religion, why can't I do it? Okay? Both married in their 30s, a 24-year-old socially prominent girl who could speak fluent French. Both presidents dealt with civil rights movements for African Americans. Both presidents were assassinated on a Friday, let me check these right, in the back of the head before a major holiday while sitting next to their wives by assassins known by 3 names consisting of 15 letters: John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald shot Kennedy from a warehouse and was captured in a theater. Booth shot Lincoln in a theater and was captured in a warehouse. Well, really a barn. But it's kind of a warehouse. No, it's kind of a warehouse. It's a warehouse. Both assassins were shot and killed with a Colt revolver days after they assassinated the president, and both before they could be brought to trial. And finally, both presidents were succeeded by vice presidents named Johnson. Let me see, I'm behind my thing here. Okay, behind President named Johnson, born in 1808 and 1908, respectively. See?
All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that as much.
Okay, so with that, I'll just end it there and just say, you know, I hope that this was helpful for folks to realize that for many, they've been worried about the Zeitgeist movie and what it teaches. It's a joke. It's laughable that anyone would take this serious in any way, shape, or form. This has been, as we've shown, such a lack of scholarship, such a lack of just any basic type of critical thinking. So this was a special edition of Slick Answers as Matt was away. We will have an after show. We're going to continue discussing this on the Council of Google Plus. So if you stay on the Bible Thumping Wingnut Network channel, on the Bible Thumping Wingnut YouTube page, you're going to see the Council of Google Plus begin, and that will be where we're going to continue this discussion. Thanks for all those who are watching. I hope this was helpful, and we clearly tried to show that the Zeitgeist movie is debunked.
Looking for that perfect track for your next evangelism outreach? Look no further. At TractPlanet.com, we have solid biblical tracts that are a breeze to hand out. They are beautifully designed and are the highest quality tracts available. With over 80 different designs in stock and literally hundreds more available by custom order, we're sure to have just the right one for you. You can get any of our items printed with your church or ministry information, or have us design a brand new tract just for you. We are committed to the solid biblical message of law to the proud and grace to the humble. Each tract is firm on the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the necessity of repentance and faith in salvation. Come check us out at TractPlanet.com and make sure you use coupon code BTWN at checkout for 10% off your entire order. That's TRACTPlanet.com, coupon code BTWN.
The good news is Striving for Eternity would love to come to your church to spend 2 days with your folks teaching them biblical hermeneutics. That's right, the art and science of interpreting scripture. The bad news is somebody attending might be really upset to discover Jeremiah 29:11 should not be their life verse. To learn more, go to strivingforeternity.org to host a Bible interpretation made easy seminar in your area. Ding dong! Jehovah's Witnesses. Ding dong! Mormons. Christian, are you ready to defend the faith when false religions ring your doorbell? Do you know what your Muslim and Jewish friends believe? You will if you get Andrew Rappaport's book, What Do They Believe? When we witness to people, we need to present the truth, but it is very wise to know what they believe, and you will get Andrew Rappaport's book at whatdotheybelieve.com.